Streaming now on IWTV. Action Wrestling. Check our schedule for all upcoming Action Wrestling events scheduled to stream live on IWTV. Watch over 90 Action Wrestling shows on demand anytime, featuring AC Mack, Adam Priest, Alex Kane, Cruel, and more.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Business of the Business. I am your co-host, JP John Poz, with the two-man power trip. Of course, joining me is the doctor himself, Mr. Lavie Margolin. Lavie, how you doing today, sir?
Hey, John, I'm doing great. A very special day for us, especially on the Business of the Business podcast, given our unique focus in the world of wrestling intersecting with business. A man that really needs no introduction to our audience and beyond, but I just want to take a moment to talk about his bio and his recent book before turning it over to you, John. So we're very fortunate today to welcome George Barrios, the author of the brand new book, and I'll hold it up if you're watching on the video, Something Wrong But Never in Doubt, How a Cuban Kid from Queens Transformed WWE. George was raised in Queens and obtained an MBA from the University of Connecticut School of Business. Mr. Barrios has held senior executive roles at the New York Times, Time Warner, HBO, and Praxair. He is the co-founder and co-CEO of ISOS Capital, a University of Connecticut trustee, and has served on the board of Make-A-Wish America and Bolero while chairing the National Make-A-Wish Foundation. Of course, in our world, best known for his transformational tenure as co-president and board member of WWE. Without further delay, George, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Lavie, and thanks, John, and thanks both of you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to this.
So obviously the book, Sometimes Wrong But Never in Doubt, opens up with your roots, Cuban kid, you're from Queens. So growing up there, when did you first kind of discover pro wrestling? And were you a fan? As far as
of course, yeah. It was my abuelo, I grew up in an apartment building, and it was my mom and her sister, two sisters, my mom and my dad in one apartment, two sisters, my cousin and my grandfather in the other one, the same building. So it was like one family growing up together. So yeah, me and my cousin Jorge, but he goes by George as well, which I was always like, come on, you guys couldn't be creative. You got two kids, 2 years apart, and they're both George, but that's what it was. And my grandfather, would watch it all the time. I mean, it was, that was the Jimmy Snuka era. That was Ricky the Dragon Steamboat was my personal favorite. It was a thrill when I got, he was a producer at WWE. So when I first joined, I got to meet him when I did one of the circuits, which is really cool. But I'd watch it with my grandfather and my cousin religiously.
So how do you make the leap, though? You're a big fan. How do you kind of get into WWE? How do you get in there?
Oh, well, look, it was a long time before that, right? I had probably about a 20-year career and a lot of the companies you mentioned at Time Warner, the New York Times Company, Praxair, a couple of more entrepreneurial things, and moving between general management roles of managing businesses, financial management, and strategic management. So it's doing that, and then I'm at the time I'm the treasurer of the New York Times Company. I'm working with the typical recruiting firms. They know I'm looking for a public company CFO job. Not because I remember telling Vince one time, like, dude, I'm the accidental CFO. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to run a company. I wanted to be the CEO, which meant being the CEO. But I came to the conclusion along the way is, hey, I'm going to get the CFO gig somewhere, and that'll be that. I'll use that and to jump over, because I'm going to do that job more as a strategist operator than as an accountant, or let's say. So in any event, people know I'm looking. I get a call from Spencer Stewart. I think it opens up one of the chapters. I pick up the phone. He says, hey, I got something good. And I'm like, all right, what is it? He's like, oh, it's a public company. Great. Check. CFO job. Check. 300 or so million in revenue. All right. It's a decent size. It's profitable. So everything's great. It's headquartered in Stamford. Now, back to your original question. At this point, I had not watched wrestling since I was in college. So it's been 20 years at that point.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, and he goes to me, I go to him. I goes, oh man, that sounds awesome. What's the job? And And he goes, it's CFO of WWE. And I go, what's that? And he goes, the wrestling. And I go, and I hope I don't offend you guys or your audience, but it's a direct quote. And I go, Adam, are you fucking kidding me? That's what you're calling me about? Wrestling? And, because I watched it as a kid, watched a little bit in college, had lost track of it. But, to me, it was kind of a circus. That was in my mind, not knowing anything. And then he throws that back at me. He says, hey, George, you're the guy who says, hey, I'm not interested in your opinion. Give me the facts. Give me what I need to know, and then I'll form my own opinion. And I go, yeah, you're right. I do say that. And he goes, well, what do you know about WWE? I go, nothing. He goes, so, why don't you take your own advice and learn a little bit? I said, that's a good point. So I went, I did that, as much as you could do it. This is actually late 2007. So internet's around, obviously, but it's not as easy to get information as it is today. But you can get some. So, I do something and I go, boy, this is interesting. So let me meet, kind of, what in my mind I'm imagining is a cast of characters to go meet. And so I meet the people that were there at the time, and actually totally different than what I expected. Incredibly professional, smart people who really cared about whatever they were doing for the company, whether it was marketing or the production side or the finance side, whatever. It was, you could tell people cared. Met Vince during that process. And obviously I'd watched him as a kid, had never put two and two together that he was actually the guy, behind all of this. To me, he was the announcer in the yellow jacket. And, it was the first, so I meet Vince and, I have my own perception, which today I think most people still have this of him, that he's a, loud, extroverted guy, with strong opinions. He's actually, at least, the 12 years I was with him and I saw it that first day, a very quiet guy, more of a stoic, an introvert, actually very different than me personally. So it can be difficult actually to, I always say the hardest part of working with Vince, and it's not what people expect, it was the communication. He's just a quiet, introverted guy. So in any event, but go through that process. I go, you know what? This is interesting. I'd be lying if I would tell you that I knew how interesting. It took me a couple of years, and for a reason it took that long, to really realize, holy shit, there's a huge opportunity here that people don't get. But in any event, that was kind of the journey there. A few months after I started, Michelle kind of went through her own similar process. She had worked for Vince previously, so she had a little bit more context than I did in the first XFL launch, much earlier in her career. But anyway, she started a few months later. We became kind of fast business friends. And the rest is history. It was just one of the great runs, I think, that in business generally.
So obviously you get hired, right? You get in there. Yep. Your initial reaction is like, basically, I've got stuff I want to do, or is it more kind of like sit back and see what Vincent wants to kind of?
Well, it was it was let me learn. That's always my kind of. I remember one story early on. As I'm learning the business, I'm like, okay, I get this sense. You guys know that there are these loops that we're doing every week, right? Where you're going around doing what the house shows, then leading to Raw and SmackDown, and then eventually once a month you're doing the pay-per-view event. But anyway, so I got this thing, and I'm like, all right, I want to see how this thing works. So I go. I don't tell Vince anything. I just go, and the guy running production, I say, hey, I want to go on one of these tours. He's like, oh, you want to go to Monday Night Raw? You mean? I go, no, I want to do all of it. I want to do it the whole loop because I want to see how it all works. He goes, well, there's really nothing. I'm like, yeah, I want to go see it. So I go out and forgot the exact towns, but it's a small town in Alabama. Then it's Monroe, Louisiana. Then it's Jackson, Mississippi, and then we end the loop. Monday Night Raw, I think, was in Nashville. I think that was the loop. And I remember, so first of all, I learned actually how the internal operations work. But I'll never forget. I'm in one of those fairground type buildings. I think it was in Jackson, Mississippi. I think that's where it was. We're there. The crowd is hot. It's like 5,000 people, 6,000 people packed. And I'm looking around going, oh my God. And amazingly, Karl Malone is in the audience. We figure out he's in the audience, and he cuts a promo in the middle of the ring, right? Because he was a huge wrestling fan. So in any event, that to me, like I remember Vince, next following week, He rings me up in my office. Hey, are you busy? I'm not, no, go. All right, go upstairs. He's like, hey, so I heard, somebody told him you did the loop. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, why'd you do it? I tell him, I want to learn the business. I got to see it. I get the numbers, but I got to see it. I got to touch it. I got to put those things together. He's like, wow. He goes, I've been doing this for 20 years. Every time we bring in an executive in, they always want to go to Monday Night Raw or SmackDown because that's where the catering is and that's the big show. He goes, I've never had somebody, at your level going in and doing that. So I wasn't trying to do it, but I won some points from him on that. On your question of what were we doing? Were we joined? So I'm doing that kind of learning. And then remind you guys, the financial crisis hits, right? So there's a period of time, which seems like a long time ago, where you're a business, you don't know if you're going to survive. It was kind of similar to the COVID thing where you're like, well, what is happening here? Is the world, financial system going to collapse? Everybody's going to lose their jobs. So what do? Michelle and I really spend the time, and Vince kind of saying, hey, what's our plan to kind of ride this storm out? You do the typical bunch of stuff. So, hey, we got to get leaner. We got to, cut our costs. We want to have a cushion, blah, blah, blah. So that's why that first year and a half, it's that we're focused on that. We end up cutting our dividend, things like that, things that are incredibly difficult, but you feel like you have to do because you have lost total visibility to the business. It's coming out of that, let's say 2010-ish, a year and a half, 2 years later, we're okay. That's behind us. It's behind the world. Michelle and I start thinking about, what is the opportunity here? I mean, you can always run everything you're doing a little bit better, which is fine. So we start doing that, like thinking about how do we do the events better? How do we do this better? How do we do that better? During that time, we also say to get an idea of what, the art of the possible is, we got to go a lot deeper in understanding kind of how our fans, interact with us, right? We see shit like ratings. That doesn't tell you anything. Yeah, you have people at the event, and that's awesome. And so that in and of itself is like, Vince used to call them a focus group every week, no doubt about it. But when you're, having your people are watching you in India, in the Middle East, certainly in Europe and South America, those are all different people who are, interacting. You need to learn about them. If you really want to say, hey, I want to be able to entertain you or whatever you do, I don't care what business you're in, you got to understand folks. Even in the US, we just had what I'd call a pretty shallow understanding. So anyway, while we're doing the learning the inside, we're doing, this kind of consumer research in India, in the Middle East, in Latin America, in the US to really go deep. We're also looking at things of understanding or getting a point of view of where's the industry going. There's a lot going on, right? There's a lot going on in the media and entertainment sector. Who are going to be the winners and losers? We knew it was changing dramatically, right? Is it the pipes? Is it the networks? Is it scripted content? Is it unscripted content? Sports? So we're doing all that work. And then the big aha, which seems easy now, right, guys? Like it seems like, oh, come on, how difficult was that? But the entire world thought we were wrong. Literally the entire world. The aha moment is when we go, yeah, here's what we think is going to happen in the industry. There's going to be a proliferation of content. UGC, we were talking about AI at that point, one day coming around, not too long from then. It ended up being about 10 years and increasing the amount of content, all this stuff. Content's going to get fragmented. What is going to be left? Well, in our mind, it was the most powerful thing were things that were being watched live were going to be unique because everything else you could watch asynchronously, on demand. You couldn't do that live. So that was going to be unique. Things that are tribal, that create kind of intense passion, things that can cross borders. So you start saying, oh yeah, that sounds like sports. You're right. It sounds like sports. People back then would say sports were valuable. The insight, and then they'd say, well, wrestling's not a sport because you know the outcome. The insight we had was it's not sports. It's not that there's a ball involved. It's that it has all those attributes I mentioned. It's on live. It's tribal. It's multi-generational. It crosses boundaries, physical boundaries. Well, holy shit. Wrestling has the same exact stuff. Big pause. All right. So now let's look at these business models. Well, the sports, again, if you believe, which we did and nobody did, everybody told us we were wrong, that what I just said is true, you say, all right, let's look at the business models. Well, we're making our money giving away what's the most valuable thing, which is the video content. And we're using that, like an infomercial to sell T-shirts and toys and tickets. very good business model, can do real well. But the thing where the value is, we're basically giving away. And we're looking at what the NBA, baseball, hockey, people, like I said, 48 weeks out of the year, we were beating the NBA Monday night. You add up all that consumption, and we're like, there is a big problem here. There's a total mismatch by an order of 10x, not 10%, 10 times different what our eyeballs are generating in economic value. So anyway, long-winded thing, we go, that's the play. And this can be huge. This is not a double. This could be a 5 to 10x opportunity. And so those are rare. And we say that is now what we're going to, our windmill, we're chasing that. And look, her and I basically, right. So, today we're investors in the largest sports holding company in the world, Global Sport Group, backed by CVC. We're on the board and investors. And basically, we develop a playbook around that idea of how do we make WWE as big as it possibly can in that world of live entertainment, right? Forget about sports entertainment. It's live content. That's what it is. And, look, little by little, block by block, it was our content strategy, the social, the digital, the direct-to-consumer WWE network. It was how do we make our athlete team bigger stars? We build the performance center in Orlando. That was around that. How do we train them so that they're not just great wrestlers, but they're great media personalities? Look, it had been going on for a long time, but how do we scale that so everybody's doing it? How do you build out a data infrastructure so you really understand how your fans are interacting with all your content at the event, on YouTube, on TikTok, on traditional TV, direct to consumer, all that stuff. So there's 1,000 little actions. We stitch those things together, and little by little, you see the results over time. I think when I started, the company was worth just under $1 billion. When I leave, with the merger with UFC, they valued WWE at $9.5 billion. So the whole merger was about 19. So anyway, it was that journey, incredibly painful at times. I talk about the swamp of despair in the book. You're trying to do something big, which we were trying to do. It's not a straight line up. There were things where people are going, it's not moving fast enough, and you're getting killed. And we're a public company, so it's in the press. So there was a lot of dark days we talk about. But if you push through. And the title of the book came from somebody once wrote in one of my performance reviews, sometimes wrong, never in doubt. That conviction comes from having done the work. We had done the work, and we felt we were dead sure the plan was right. We could see it working. It wasn't manifesting in the economics immediately, but we could see the things we were looking at, the kind of leading indicators they were working. So anyway, that was the journey, and it was, like I said, a lot of fun.
Now, obviously, you saw a lot of interest level for international markets, and it was growing during your leadership. How about how instrumental you were in establishing the major business relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? Can you just walk us through that and maybe share a story of how basically that came to life? Because that's huge business for WWE.
Yeah,
right now.
It was interesting. Look, we had, early on, and it gets back to this, that people were saying, investors especially, public investors saying, well, why are you guys investing so much in the social, digital, the data, all that stuff? There's no money in that. There's click. And we're like, no, this is a battle for time. Time is the economic unit of this business, and we're going to win the battle for time around the world. You bring up Saudi Arabia. Well, it turns out Saudi Arabia at that point was per capita the number one consumer of video in the world on YouTube. Right?
Wow.
Because there was so much regulation on the traditional pay TV and free TV market on what could go on, people would spend a lot of time watching what they wanted to watch on YouTube. So that is building a brand. We go into the Middle East before Saudi Arabia, and there's a lot of debates. It's the world is full of different cultures. I've been in every continent in the world. The world is full of different cultures. As a business, at one point or another, if you're going to go outside your home market, you have to make the decision of whether you're going to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because there are things that are going to be different than you. There are going to be belief systems that are different. And look, everything has degrees. So at some point you go, yeah, I'm not supporting that. Right? I can't do that. But other times there's a lot that you just say, hey, that's not the way I think of the world. But that's a decision you have to make as a business. And we had made the decision that Look, what we do is put smiles on people's faces. That fundamentally is all we were trying to do, and that's a good thing anywhere. I still remember, I'll answer your question about the kingdom, but I still remember an event. I think we were doing it in Abu Dhabi. I think it was Abu Dhabi. And, there were things there about what women could do, couldn't do. I'm trying to think, was it Abu Dhabi? No, it was another country, another city, but I'm pretty sure it was there. But in any event, at one of our events, female wrestlers are on the stage competing, and a chant breaks out that says, "There is hope." There is hope. That the crowd begins chanting that because they're saying, hey, look, here, women are doing something that we would not normally do in our culture. And, we see this as an opening, an opportunity. So, and I remember seeing that and being proud. I'm the father of 3 daughters. I'm like, yeah, you're kind of, being part of, another country's journey, if you will. And it felt special. Now you move forward. Yeah, I was a part of, that, doing that first, commercial deal and partnership with the kingdom. And it was an interesting story. We had been working on it for a few months. I forgot exactly how it had come to us. Someone had connected us and said, hey, look, they would be interested in learning more about WWE and Vision 2030 had been published at that point in time, which is something I think they worked with McKinsey on, of like basically what people like me and Michelle do, which is develop strategic plans for a business. They had done it for the country and they had published it. You could go read it and see it, what they were thinking. And sports was a big part of that. And so anyway, and again, I forgot who actually came to us and made the connection, but that conversation begins. And look, and we're working towards the transaction that eventually we ended up signing. And right in the middle of that, the murder of Khashoggi happens, or the killing of Khashoggi, whatever happened, but that happens. And in the middle of that, we're planning on when we're going to go. I ended up going to the kingdom. We had some open items before we had a deal that we were ready to sign. So I was the one who went in a small team to kind of hash out the final points. But right as we're planning to do that happens. And it was an incredibly difficult time. I remember, Vince sitting in his office late one night, and saying, thinking was the most monumental decision he had made up until that point. What was the right thing to do? And for all of us, it was the 3 of us, it was like 11 or 12 at night, and we're going through that discussion. And I think the tension is, number one, you don't know what happened. I always tell people, if you want to know kind of the value of the news, go back and look at what people were writing a year ago on something. 90% of the time, it was wrong. It's in the moment. You don't know. And again, I'm not trying to minimize what happens, but that's the reality. So I always say, news to me is kind of, you got to apply a filter to it. So you really don't know what's happened. We've got this point of view that, we're going to put smiles on people's faces around the world. This is an opportunity. It's an incredible market. We believe in the Vision 2030, but now you have this, this reality that you're facing. There's a lot of, backlash. People are pulling out of discussions with the kingdom. And, long story short, and it's one of those decisions, you make the best decision you can. But the 3 of us spent, hours that night. I mean, I think we finally made the call at like 1 a.m. That we were going, and I think 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock the next day, I was on a jet to Riyadh.
Man, and look at it now, 100 million for Royal Rumble, 250 million for WrestleMania. So it's not only big business, it's gigantic business for WWE. Yeah,
it's that part of the world is growing dramatically. Obviously, it's got its unique challenges, as we all know, and see what's going on now. But there's obviously a real commitment there to take that country and continue moving forward. And I always tell people, if you really want to get a sense of how they're thinking of the world, you don't usually see this, but they've got that plan out there. I always tell people, if you have questions about it, you should read it. They tell you kind of how they're thinking about things. And from my standpoint, it was pretty impressive. But I took a lot of personal backlash, right? Because you're doing something and people are then questioning you, like, why would you do that? That's a terrible thing that just happened. Of course it is. And, as I told you, as you're making these, you have tensions around you around what the right thing is, and you try to do, make the best decision you can. But according to Vince, it was the toughest decision he'd ever made in his life. I don't know if I would put it there. I had Michelle and I we were more of the mind of, look, we get it. This is terrible. We don't know everything, and there's long-term opportunity here for the business that you do have to think about. And it's not just all about, and it's not that it's just all about the money, but certainly that your economic interests are something that are in play, and you're balancing different things. So, but yeah, it was, and that trip, it was the first time I had ever been in the kingdom, was pretty unique as well. So, but I'll always remember it. It's like one of those indelible memories for me.
Let me hand it over to Lavie.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book was your candor, both in terms of sharing your experiences, but it was also almost like a Harvard case study in terms of exploring the multiple times growth in your initial role with WWE. But people should definitely look at all of those details. But after your initial run, what prompted your departure from the WWE, and what lessons from that period did you carry forward?
Yeah, that was an interesting time. So people know that, I think it was January 31st, press releases out, George and Michelle are gone, which, and you can read through the press release, they've been fired because it's happening that day. The stock drops, I think 35-40% overnight on the news. I remember the ex-CEO of U.S. Bank, one of the largest banks in the country and the world, was the CEO. He had retired after an illustrious career there, and he had retired and taken the CEO of Make-A-Wish. So I was on the board. Eventually, I became the chair. So titularly, at least, I was his boss. That's kind of ridiculous. Richard Davis is, kind of a legend of business. But anyway, Richard calls me the next day, and he goes, how you doing? I'm like, hey, it's what happens. He goes, yep, it's what happens. And he goes, well, at least now you know what you're worth. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, my calculation that when they announced it, the stock dropped, $3 billion. So at least you put that, or $2 billion or something like that. I should have looked up the math. So I chuckled. I go, yeah, I guess so. But to answer your question more, a little more fulsomely, the story actually began in July or August of 19. Michelle and I, after a great run, the business was beyond, not beyond what we thought it could get to, kind of almost exactly what we thought we could get to, but we knew there was more runway, which there certainly has been. But we were both, I think, eager. We were co-leaders of the company, and we were like, we want to lead our own thing. We want to do our own thing. And that funny thing, we ended up afterwards just staying together and continue to work together. But at that point, we're like, hey, we're going to go do our own thing. So in late July, early August, it was after an earnings call. By happenstance, both of us were going on vacation, and we had talked to each other about, leaving. Oh my God, I'm thinking too. I'm going to tell Vince that week. I'm like, shit, I was going to tell him the same thing. We're both going on vacation. Let's tell him together. I had the earnings call, go in, again, late July, early August. We're like, hey, Vince, this has been awesome. It's been a great ride. We want to go do our own thing. Dead silence, like his face, he's like, you can't do it. He can't do that. We've been through too much together. He gets choked up. He starts, tears are in his eyes. I got tears in my eyes. Michelle has tears in her eyes. So we spend a couple of hours of him saying, and some of the, like best things I've ever heard personally about myself, were some of the things he said during those 2 hours. It's like, I couldn't have done this without you. I still can hear him say, he goes, for 30 years, I've been pulling everyone behind me to build this. He goes, for the last 10 years, you guys have been, pulling me. and saying, well, like, what do you want? And it's like, well, Vince, we want to go run our own thing. And he's like, well, you're doing that here. I was like, no, but it's different, bro. Anyway, Michelle and I walk out of his office, and it's 10 o'clock at night. And she goes, George, the place is awesome. We've had a great run. We should just do let's just stick to it. It's time for the next chapter. And I go into sell mode. And I can be pretty persuasive, believe it or not, when I want to be. And I'm like, Michelle, we got to do this. I mean, look, the guy has just begged us to stay. Selfishly, there's more runway. There's a way that we can get what we want. Look, what I want, you want something. Vince wants what he wants. There's a way to do that. So we spend the next few months, trying to put together something. Well, how about if you do less of that? And we'll do more of this, or vice versa. Well, during that process, what happens, and we're not the first time, or it's not the first time it happened. Hearts hardened. People's now starting getting, on all sides, aggravated at each other during that process. And it kept worse and worse. And, what ends up happening, you end up now, snide remarks are slipping through your mouth, right? When you get aggravated at somebody, you don't listen politely. You kind of, you bare your teeth a little bit. And so, that unfortunately, damages the relationship in the moment. And so by the end of, 3 or 4 months later, I was like, well, I'm done. But we have an earnings call in early February. This is now late November, December. We got to stay to that, because that's when we talk about the strategy for the next few years, because we had reached this new pinnacle, in 19. So I'm going to stay. And then I'm going back in, and it's done, and we're going to do a plan, and I'm not listening to anything else. Well, we have a board meeting in January 31st, and we're doing the typical stuff. I'm not myself, you can tell. I am, probably as low key as Vince had ever seen me. So there's a bad taste in the room because everybody can feel it. And then, later, I had something to do right after the board meeting wrapped up, a couple hours, later in the afternoon. He calls me, hey, do you got a minute? Sure, go up there. He's like, hey, this isn't working. I'm like, I agree. So we got to end it. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. Let's go back to the original plan that we talked about, Michelle and I said 6 months. He's like, no, we got to do it right now. And I remember going, like now, today, when we have an earnings call in 4 days? He's like, yeah, George. He goes, you got to pull off the Band-Aid. I was like, all right. I go, this is not going to go well. It's not going to go well internally. It's not going to go well externally. He said, so we decided, and that was it. And a few months later, while Michelle and I were kind of plotting what we were going to do, he said, you know what, we should talk to Vince. That was just not the way you want to end after 12 great years. Called him up, said, hey, would you like to get together for dinner? Now, this is right in the middle of COVID. And Vince, as you guys probably have heard or know, he's not a guy who does lunches and dinners. That's just not his. He doesn't do business lunches and dinners. That's not his thing. So we call him up. I wasn't sure what he was going to say. Right there, he goes, that would be great. Let's do it. And, he said, let's meet at La Scala in Greenwich. So it's the three of us are the only ones there, because, again, it's the middle of COVID. And, and it was nice. It was nice to do that. But, look, people around the people that we continue to work with, because we end up doing advising and investing in sports, people ask us, well, what happened? And you tell them, and they're like, not the full story. You say, blah, 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 disagree. And they're like, you can tell they're going, yeah, they just got rid of you. They fired you. All right, what are you going to do? You can't change people's mind. I still remember the day after the firing, after the thing, Jim Cramer on CNBC goes, I don't know what happened. We thought Barrios was doing a great job. So, it's like one of those. But look, the reality is, when Vince called me, to come back to the board, because he had reached, in his mind, a decision of that the company needed to do something big for its next move. Wasn't sure what it was, but he wanted help kind of thinking through that. And I still remember the call. I was with my mom in Miami, and phone rings, and, he tells me, he's just said, he kind of tells me a little bit of what he's thinking. He goes, I just need the A team, can you come back, and help? And I said, yeah, of course. And it's funny. And He goes, do you think Michelle will come back? Yeah. I go, yeah, I think she'll come back. He goes, well, can you call her? And I'm like, yeah, Vince, I'll call her. I'll tell her. So anyway, we decided to come back. And look, on a selfish level for your own ego, the fact that the whole world saw that, wow, yeah, we didn't really understand the story, because when it was time to really do the big stuff, he brings the people he trusted, and it respected and trusted people. Like he said, he wanted the A team. So it was nice going back. I remember getting off the elevator on the 4th floor. They hadn't moved to the new building yet. And he's got that pencil thin mustache that he had for a while, which was like, what the hell is that? Kind of caught me off guard a little bit. But again, he got choked up, and he just said, welcome home. And we got choked up, and it was the right ending to that movie. The other ending was not good. So it's like he kind of scrubbed that one and did an alternate ending. I'm like, that was the right ending for the movie.
Amazing. And as you had reflected on the book, a good deal of the momentum and financial success of WWE and the TKO empire is many of the revenue drivers and platforms that you helped to establish or did establish. So, as a business expert, sort of putting on your consultant or analysis hat at the moment, in your view, what are the opportunities and challenges in maintaining strong fan engagement with today's live event pricing, and perhaps a multi-generational cradle-to-grave strategy? That just reminded me of one of the quotes from Bob Chapek that you have on the back of your book from Walt Disney Company, in which they're trying to engage fans throughout, whereas some may be put off by the prices, for example, of live events now.
Yeah, and yeah, it's a delicate balance. It's one of the nice things of the strategy Michelle and I pioneered, which wasn't just using social and digital, kind of the clip strategy, which everyone did. We were creating, thousands of hours of, mid-length, long form content across a variety of platforms, right? So we had the 300 or 400 hours of match content of the in-ring, but it was everything else that, in our view, really allowed the explosion of the brand, especially outside the US. Personally, I would be leaning into that more, not less. I think WWE continues to do a good job. When we left, it was the #1 sports property across every social digital platform. It had the largest direct-to-consumer, and then it had signed those deals to make it one of the largest through the traditional, in terms of economics, through the traditional channels. So I would continue to lean into that, and probably, if I was running TKO, would probably lean into it even more than they are today. I mean, that's what our portfolio companies, we talk about this a lot, right? Because we're investors and board members of a holding company that's invested in La Liga and Ligue 1 and WTA, FIVB, Global Volleyball, 3 rugby properties. We just bought the largest equestrian business in the US. We talk about that issue, Lavie, all the time. And the problem is, people like direct economics, right? People like to say, I make a widget and I know I'm going to sell that widget for this amount of money. So it's why investors, like everybody loves sponsorship. Oh, if we can just get the next sponsor. Awesome. It is great. The thing about building brand and using content specifically to do it, and the data, the plumbing that you need on the data to make you really good at that, is it's second order economics. You're not selling that widget necessarily. It's growing the brand to allow you to monetize however you can. And so that part makes people uncomfortable. It made us uncomfortable when we did it, but our thesis was right. And so now we have strong conviction. That, to your point about the pricing, when you're doing things like that, then you have multiple ways that people can engage. Now, do I think would it be great to lower the prices of the events? It is. Is there a reality that look, it's the thing we talk about all the time for all of us. Inflation has, the last 5-7 years is a new thing. Inflation, we had never felt that, right, in our lifetime almost. Maybe when we were kids, or at least I'm old enough, I remember that. But yeah, that's, I think, the best that you can do. I mean, the costs are real. The increases are real. It's why it's a Disney, a WWE, any event business, has to figure out a way to manage that. And unfortunately, one of the ways that you can still be able to do it is through price, but then give your fans different ways to get it, where maybe the price is potentially free. So it's that balance, but it's not easy. It isn't easy.
Amazing. This has been amazing information. So I just have one more question before I turn it over to John. And we are curious people here on the podcast. So given your investment in sports and deep knowledge of entertainment and sports, if the right pro wrestling opportunity ever came along, would you ever get back in the business, quote unquote, to invest in the pro wrestling business?
The answer is yes, generally. Would I do it with someone else? I can't imagine myself doing that. So, I'm lucky. WWE is a public company. So if I want to, as part of TKO, so it's easy for me to invest there. But, it's for me, I mean, it's not to the degree of Vince, right? Vince is the father of WWE, but I feel too much, love for the company. When you say, well, it's a company, well, a company is a group, a lot of people. It's also the thing you spend so much time on that I could never see doing something where it's competing. I never say never on almost anything, but that would be, I find it hard. And to your question, if I want to invest in it, I can just do it today. Just buy the stock and invest in it. So
great. Thank you.
Yep.
Now, before we let you go, let's give one last big push for sometimes wrong, but never in doubt, how a Cuban kid from Queens transformed WWE. Tell us about the book and give it one last big push. Why everybody should go out there and get it.
Look, I think if you're interested in business strategy and how to transform a business, there's a lot there for you. If you're interested in, how somebody can come from pretty humble means and scratch and claw their way around, there's stuff in it for you. If you're I've gotten a lot of, I'm a UConn trustee, you mentioned, so I'm around students quite a bit, and there's been a lot of people who have, gotten the book, and some I shared the manuscript early who have said, boy, it's like a playbook for kind of, what not to do, because I made a lot of mistakes, but also some good ideas on your career. So I think for a variety of people, there's something to take from it. What I'll tell people on the website, georgebarrios.com, I made the prologue available for free. So if you want to get a sense of what the book is like, you'll get it there. And the prologue is that call from Vince when I was visiting my mom to come back. And so you get a sense anyway for the tone of the book.
Now, where can everybody find it? Where can everybody get it?
Wherever you get your books. So Barnes & Noble, Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, Apple Books. So where you normally would find it.
Sometimes wrong, but never in doubt. George Barrios, thank you so much. And thank you, obviously, for the book, but thank you so much for all the time. I really appreciate it. Everybody needs to get out there and get the book.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Lavie. I really appreciate it. It was nice meeting you guys.
Thanks, George. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, Lavie, let's wrap it up. Let's head towards the plug. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. How about you?
Follow me on X, Lavie Marg, Lavie Marg. Check out my long-form articles on lioncubjobsearch.com. And a little bit off my game because that was an amazing experience for us. I usually have my book handy, but holding it up right now. Ultimate Fighters, Donald Trump, Dana White, and UFC's Road to the White House.
All right. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. Thank you, Lavie, especially thank you to George. And everybody needs to get out there and get that book. We'll see everybody next week for the business of the business. Have a good week, folks.